Because this old this Notting Hill two-tier police thing is driving everybody nuts. David Spencer, Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange, former Met Police officer. David, welcome to Talk Drive. How are you?
Good evening. Well, thank you.
We're looking very smart, so I feel underdressed in your presence. So I've been ranting all day about this because I don't want to make it political in any which way, because I think it was absolutely right what we saw in terms of the policing with those riots. The appalling scenes in Southport were dealt with rapidly, quite aggressively, and we saw a police approach that I hadn't seen for a long time. Now, I will add into the mix, there were other riots that time in Leeds, which didn't seemingly gain the same attention. But I think that the general public looked at what happened and saw people being arrested, being paraded, being arrested, tried and jailed within 23 minutes, and that was fantastic. Then Starmer came out, David, and he made that point about how appalling it was that mosques were being attacked, etc., all of which we agree. But over the next couple of weeks, there have been many, many examples of how he's now accused of two-tier policing. And we used the weekend Notting Hill Carnival, and I've been met with a barrage of criticism today, and I don't care. 330 people arrested, 8 people stabbed, 3 are fighting for their lives, tens of policemen and women attacked. Why have I not seen Starmer's militia on the streets of Notting Hill this morning? Why is the same, which I support, strength shown in certain instances when it is in others? That's what I don't understand.
I think Notting Hill is a hugely challenging event to police, and we see this time and again, year after year. Of course, as you rightly say, there were over 300 arrests over the course of the carnival this weekend. I think the concerns that I have about the Notting Hill Carnival are, it's not just the number of offences, but you touched on it, it's the severity of the offending. So we have weapons and firearms being seized, we've got people that are in hospital, very seriously injured as a result of stabbings. And as well, on top of that, there is because of the sheer volume of people, the risk of crushing as well. And we saw that particularly a couple of years ago in some footage that was released. And that's before we even get into the impact on residents locally, the impact on the rest of London, with 7,000 officers being deployed to Notting Hill. They're not being deployed in neighbourhoods across the capital. So Notting Hill really raises some serious questions, which seem to be asked year on, year in, year out.
I get that, and I think, and I get it's a difficult one because, of course, you're talking about a general situation. But what I'm trying to get from you is, what I saw as strength from Starmer, right? I didn't see there. And an example I gave before, and a lot of people don't like what I said, I wonder sometimes whether there is, in fact, a very blatant two-tier policing in this country. You look at the grooming gangs in Rotherham, which we covered so much on this station with the brilliant Maggie Oliver. These were British Pakistani men, fact. And there were young, white British girls, 7 and 8, being groomed. It took 8 years. Now, what I'm asking for is for any violent paedophile to be arrested almost instantaneously. What I'm asking for is, yes, that's right about the riots, but what's the difference between people carrying aggressive weapons, stabbing people, abusing police officers at a carnival on Family Day, and a very angry person kicking a lit bin towards the police? Why are they both not the same? Why are we not taking that example that he used and implementing that with parity across the social spectrum? Knives, stop and search, get the knives off the street, deal with drugs. It seems to me that it suits them to do it in that one way, and that, I think, is dangerous long term.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that 7 weeks into this government we can lay the blame entirely at the door of the Prime Minister.
No, I blame it at Theresa May's door, absolutely, mate. If it was
and
me.
I think that's a really important point, actually, is that the inheritance that this government have received from their predecessors across the criminal justice system, not just policing, but actually across courts, prisons, you name it, the inheritance across the board is absolutely abysmal. Now, the reality is that to restore the criminal justice system to where it needs to be across the is going to cost significant amounts of money. If we're even to return to where we were in 2010, then we are talking about an influx of billions of pounds to the system. And my concern is that that money is not going to be given by the Treasury, and that is something that needs to be looked at very seriously.
I'm not trying to make it political. I completely agree with you. And I'm not, and I understand where you're coming from, but there's a point that I'm trying to make. No, there is no doubt that the Tory party left this country in a terrible, terrible state, messed up, didn't make true to the promises that they got elected on. Completely agree with that. Public services, all sorts of things. But the reason I take issue with what you said, David, is that this did happen in the last 2 months, and Keir Starmer was very forceful. He was forceful on what he saw as the far right. Why is he not forceful in Leeds as he was in Southport? Why is he not forceful in Notting Hill as he was quite rightly in Southport? All I'm saying is you've shown your strength, Keir Starmer. That should be across the board. Surely you get where I don't think that's about the last government, because he's already shown that he's capable of doing that like that.
Well, I certainly agree. I agree with you completely that there needs to be a robust response across the board, whatever the crime and whatever the criminality and whoever it is that's responsible for it. There absolutely needs to be a robust response to that. That is absolutely correct. So on that, we are completely agreed. I think one of the questions is, and you're right, of course, that we see these incidents being dealt with differently. I'm not sure Carnival is quite the right comparison, but certainly if we look at the Leeds incident versus others...
But Carnival, 330 arrests, 8 people stabbed, 3 in a critical state, people with guns and drugs.
But when we look at the political question, which you're raising around whether the Prime Minister and the role that they play, I'm not sure Carnival is quite the right example, is all I'm saying. I think that when we look at the incident in Leeds, which you mentioned earlier in July, and then the other disorder late July, early August, there are questions there. I think my big concern is that what's really difficult is that we don't have transparency about the decisions being made. So is this examples of individual poor leadership and bad decision making, or is this a systemic problem across the piece?
I mean, I meant it from the fact that we had a Prime Minister who jumped to the front with the riots, was very strong, was very robust. My question to him would be, why can't you now bring that robustness in parity across the knife crime epidemic in this country? I mean, we had this daft plan last week that a zombie knife, you can take it to your police station for a tenner. Can you imagine being stopped by a Met police officer? No, honestly, I've only got a zombie knife because I'm on the way to the police station. And somebody sent a text message, which you might find... I mean, you can get 10 years for carrying a brick in this country and £10 for carrying a zombie knife. I mean, that's...
Well, I'm not quite sure that it's correct. You can get £10 for carrying a brick. However...
No, 10 years.
Sorry, 10 years. Your point, however, about the £10 for the zombie knife, I completely agree with you. And actually, the evidence suggests that this isn't necessarily, if we look at it with relation to firearms as well, actually, these processes don't actually result in safer neighbourhoods and safer communities. But on that particular policy, that seems a very odd choice to have made. In relation to knife crime, you're right. When we look at knife crime over the last 10 years, it has rocketed. And I completely agree with you. We need to see absolutely political pressure from the top of government into how we are going to combat the knife crime epidemic which is sweeping the country.
You used to work for the Met, and I'm not asking you to be anything other than honest. Today, Labour talked about the shameful neglect of shoplifting. I always... This is destined to drive me mad. You know, drug dealers and criminals know that if you don't... Mr. Theresa bloody May again. If you don't nick over £200, you're fine. They might do it 7 times a day, as somebody said earlier, for £190. We need to respect shopkeepers. We need to respect people with small businesses. Burglaries, shoplifting, knife crime, all of this has to be dealt with robustly. And as I say, my point was, if he leads from the front with those riots, I want him to lead from the front on this other stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with the point that it requires very strong political leadership. And the point that you're making, particularly around knife crime and shopkeeping, shoplifting and all this sort of stuff, is that time and again we see that it's prolific offenders. So we looked at this at Policy Exchange last year. And as an example, we saw a case in Gateshead, a person with 350 previous convictions who, on being given the next 10 convictions, was given a community sentence. Someone in the Isle of Wight had 115 convictions. On the next time they got another 7, they got a suspended sentence. So time and again, what we're seeing is that the most prolific offenders who are causing carnage in our neighbourhoods... Laughing
at the system.
And the reality is they are being allowed to walk out of court with a community sentence or a suspended sentence.
And I suspect, again, I am going to make this political, that one of the biggest reasons the British public turned their back on the Conservative Party was that the Conservative Party was built on law and order, not a fear of law. I mean, it is incredible to me that kids, people, criminals can laugh in the face of the police nowadays. I mean, it did start with Theresa May. She completely, as Home Secretary, ruined the numbers. And let's hope there's strength, David. It's really good to have you on. So, Policy Exchange, Head of Crime and Justice, David Spencer. Good to have him on.